In 1968, Steve McQueen stood at the absolute peak of American popular culture. They called him the King of Cool, and the label was earned. He was a major figure in cinema, an avid motorsports enthusiast, and a collector who surrounded himself with machines that most people would never see outside of a magazine. When he made a film, he wouldn't accept studio fakery. He insisted on real cars, real streets, and real speed. He performed his own driving whenever the danger level allowed it, and he wouldn't let anyone else take the wheel unless the studio absolutely demanded it. Warner Brothers bought him 2 brand new Mustang GT fastbacks with sequential VIN numbers and shipped them to San Francisco. The city granted him 3 weeks of closed streets, handed over an entire hospital wing, and opened the international airport at night. Studios gave him the budgets he demanded, city governments gave him the permits, collectors gave him the cars. Everybody said yes without hesitation. So the real question is not what Steve McQueen could command. The real question is who says no to Steve McQueen. Warner Brothers ordered 2 brand new 1968 Mustang GT fastbacks from Ford for the film. Their vehicle identification numbers were sequential. Chassis 8R02S125558 and Chassis 8R02S125559 rolled off the same assembly line with only 1 digit between them, and both were painted dark Highland green and fitted with S-code 390 cubic inch V8 engines. Hollywood car builder Max Balchowsky modified both machines for punishment. He reinforced the shock towers, installed heavy-duty front springs and Coney dampers, and fitted thicker anti-roll bars to keep the cars stable at high speed. He also milled the cylinder heads and fitted larger carburetors for more power. The visual changes were just as deliberate. Both cars lost their GT fog lights, their running horse grille emblems, and their exterior Mustang and GT badging. American Racing torque thrust wheels replaced the factory rims. The result was 2 identical machines stripped of ornamentation and free of chrome excess, built to survive a film that would send them down entirely different roads. The production assigned each Mustang a different role, and that decision would shape everything that followed. Chassis 559 became the hero car. It handled the close-ups, the cruising shots, and the lighter action work, where McQueen's face needed to be visible through the glass. McQueen drove it himself in many scenes because the danger level stayed within what a lead actor could reasonably attempt. Chassis 558 had a harder job. It was the stunt car, and it was built to be destroyed. It took the jumps over San Francisco's intersectional crests, the impacts with camera cars, and the famous overshoot of a corner that sent it crashing into parked vehicles. To support this role, the stunt car received a roll bar that doubled as a camera mount, plus a generator installed in the trunk to power lighting and recording equipment. By the time filming wrapped, the 2 cars looked like brothers but had lived completely different lives. The hero car remained structurally sound and cosmetically salvageable. The stunt car was severely damaged, and the studio considered it beyond economical repair. McQueen wouldn't accept rear screen projections or studio tricks. He insisted on filming with real cars, real streets, and real speed through San Francisco's steep and irregular terrain. The city was unusually cooperative. Mayor Joseph Alioto wanted to attract Hollywood projects, and he granted extensive permits that allowed the production to close multiple streets for 3 weeks, temporarily commandeer an entire hospital wing, and secure nighttime access to San Francisco International Airport. These privileges enabled long hill descents with dramatic jumps, sequences weaving through urban traffic, and the final airport confrontation. McQueen performed portions of the chase himself, particularly in segments where his face needed to be visible through the windshield or side windows. Bud Akins and Lauren Janes handled the Mustang's more hazardous sequences, including the most aggressive jumps and slides that pushed the car to its absolute limits. Bill Hickman drove the Dodge Charger, the car doing the chasing on screen. The entire chase contains no dialogue and no musical score. The soundtrack is nothing but roaring engines, squealing tires, and aggressive gear shifts. For nearly 10 minutes, audiences experienced something that had never been captured before, and Chassis 558 absorbed every jump, every impact, and every violent landing that made it possible. After filming ended, Chassis 558 was sold for scrap. That decision fed a long-standing legend that the stunt car had been crushed or destroyed, but the legend was false. The car survived, though it left studio control and slipped into a quiet, hidden life that would keep it away from historians and enthusiasts for decades. It resurfaced in a Mexican junkyard around 2016, discovered by a man named Hugo Sanchez in Baja California. Sanchez delivered it to a custom shop in Mexicali, owned by his friend Ralph Garcia Jr. Garcia made his living building Eleanor replicas from Gone in 60 Seconds, and that was exactly what Sanchez had requested. They had ordered all the parts and were days away from cutting up the shell when Sanchez ran the vehicle identification numbers. The results came back as one of the two Bullitt Mustangs ordered by Warner Brothers. Ford historian Kevin Marty traveled to Mexicali in March 2017 and confirmed the authentication. The car had several paint layers sprayed over its original Highland Green. Its drivetrain was long gone, but the strut tower reinforcements and trunk holes for auxiliary power cables remained as physical proof. It had survived by pure accident. While Chassis 558 was disappearing into Mexico, the hero car was beginning a different kind of obscurity. After filming, Warner Brothers repaired and repainted Chassis 559 at Precision Auto Body in Hollywood. The invoice came to approximately $920, and the work returned the Mustang to roadworthy condition with a refreshed appearance. The studio then sold the car to one of its own employees, a man named Robert Ross, who registered it in California and drove it as his personal vehicle for nearly 2 years. A New Jersey police detective named Frank Maranca purchased it for about $6,000, shipped it by rail to the East Coast, and drove it sparingly over the next several years. Maranca was the first private owner to take the car out of California, and his decision to sell it would place the Mustang in the hands of a family whose approach to ownership would ensure both its survival and its long-term disappearance from public view. The hero car was about to enter the most ordinary life imaginable, and that ordinariness would save it. Maranca sold the car in 1974 to buy a Chevrolet Vega station wagon for his wife, and he placed an advertisement in the October issue of Road and Track magazine to do it. The listing read 1968 Bullitt Mustang, with the film's name misspelled in a way that perfectly captured how little anyone cared at the time. It said best offer, and the advertisement generated exactly one call from a single interested buyer. Robert Kiernan of New Jersey saw the listing and wanted a 1968 fastback with a big block engine under the hood. He was the only person who responded, and Sean Kiernan later recalled that his father simply showed up, bought the car, and took off without ceremony or fanfare. The Mustang had roughly 19,000 miles on the odometer when Robert Kiernan drove it home. Robert didn't buy the car because it was famous. He wanted a fastback. He loved the machine, and the fact that it had appeared in Bullitt was mostly incidental to the purchase. The Mustang immediately became the family's everyday driver. Mrs. Kiernan used it daily to commute to the school where she taught, and she ran ordinary errands in it around New Jersey. The most famous movie Mustang in cinema history was being used to pick up groceries and drop off children, and nobody outside the family had any idea what was sitting in their driveway. Steve McQueen tracked down Robert Kiernan after speaking with Frank Maranca in New Jersey. McQueen initially called Kiernan to discuss obtaining the car, and Kiernan said no without hesitation or elaboration. In December 1977, McQueen wrote a signed letter to Robert Kiernan on Solar Productions' letterhead. The letter opened with a direct and personal appeal. "Again, I would like to appeal to you to get back my 1968 Mustang." McQueen stated that he would very much like to keep it in the family in its unrestored condition, and he offered to replace Kiernan's car with a similar 1968 Mustang in exchange for the original. McQueen never owned either Mustang. Warner Brothers bought both cars outright for the production, and neither one ever belonged to him personally. His letter asked to get back a car he had never actually owned. Kiernan didn't reply to the letter, and he didn't sell the car to McQueen or to anyone else. Sean Kiernan said that Bullitt was part of their family, and that simple statement explained everything. The man who could command cities, studios, and unlimited budgets had been refused twice by a New Jersey family that simply liked their car and saw no compelling reason to part with it. McQueen got the streets, the hospital, and the airport. He didn't get the Mustang. The Mustang remained the Kiernan family's everyday car throughout the late 1970s. Mrs. Kiernan drove it to her teaching job and used it for ordinary errands around town, treating it as practical transportation rather than a museum piece that required special care. Around 1980, the clutch failed with roughly 65,000 miles showing on the odometer. New Jersey registration standards were making it increasingly difficult to keep the aging car roadworthy, and the family already had other vehicles available for daily use. Rather than undertake immediate repairs, they pushed the car into a garage and simply closed the door on it. It remained there for nearly 4 decades, accumulating dust and fading paint, but preserving its core structure and many original components from the film era. Robert and Sean occasionally talked about restoring it when they had time and money, but they never got around to starting the actual work. The car's existence became a closely held private secret within the family. Enthusiast circles circulated rumors about the hero car's whereabouts, with speculative stories suggesting it might be hidden in a barn somewhere on the East Coast, but no public documentation or photograph confirmed anything for decades. Then Robert Kiernan passed away in 2014. The car was still in the garage, still completely unrestored, and still unknown to anyone outside the immediate family. After Robert's death, Sean Kiernan inherited the car and began seriously considering its future for the first time. As the 50th anniversary of Bullitt approached in 2018, Sean contacted Ford about a potential collaboration that would finally introduce the car to the world after nearly 4 decades of secrecy. Ford was already deep into developing the 2019 Mustang Bullitt Tribute Edition, and the timing of Sean's outreach aligned almost perfectly with their marketing plans. At the North American International Auto Show in Detroit in January 2018, Ford unveiled the new Bullitt alongside the unrestored original. Chassis 559 appeared publicly for the first time in decades, still wearing its aged patina, faded paint, and period modifications completely intact. Journalists traced the full ownership chain from Warner Brothers to Ross to Maranza and finally to the Kiernan family. The car toured afterward, including a display on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in April 2018. Jay Leno drove it on his television program. The reveal confirmed long-standing rumors and turned the Bullitt Mustang from myth into a verifiable artifact. But the hero car was only half the story. Meanwhile, Chassis 558 was undergoing its own narrow escape on an entirely different continent. After Kevin Marti authenticated the car in March 2017, Ralph Garcia Jr. and Hugo Sanchez immediately abandoned their Eleanor conversion plan. They had already ordered all the parts to turn the stunt car into a replica of the Gone in 60 Seconds Mustang when the VIN check came back just days before the cutting would have begun. Garcia's team shifted their entire project's trajectory and began restoring the car as the original Bullitt stunt machine instead. As of 2026, Garcia reports the restoration is close to finished, according to recent updates from the Peterson Automotive Museum. Garcia sourced NOS parts from specialists across the country to maintain authenticity wherever possible. The process included redoing the suspension, which was completely blown out from its stunt work during filming in San Francisco. The original camera mounts were preserved as historical evidence. The dents from the famous jumps were left untouched. The hole in the driver's side rear wheel, well, believed to be for the generator exhaust, remains exactly as it was. The hoses around the gas tank are still there. A real movie car was nearly destroyed to build a fake one. It survived because a partner in Mexico ran a VIN check on a whim. Neither car was saved on purpose. Neither car survived because someone valued it as a collectible. The hero car lived because a family refused to sell, and the stunt car lived because a VIN check happened at the right moment. Now the numbers. A new Mustang GT fastback cost roughly $2,600 in 1968. Hagerty's price guide values an ordinary 1968 GT in good condition at roughly $70,000 today. The Bullitt Mustang sold at Mecum auctions in Kissimmee, Florida on the 10th of January 2020. The hammer price was $3.4 million and $3.74 million with buyer's fees included. That result surpassed the previous Mustang record, a 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake that sold for $2.2 million in January 2019 by roughly 70%. Accounts differ on what Robert Kiernan paid for the car in 1974. Several sources report $3,500. Several others report $6,000. Mecum opened the bidding at $3,500 in 2020, which suggests that's the figure the family used. It's not proof, and this video won't pretend to settle it. What year was it, and what color? What did someone once offer you for it? And the real one, the one Robert Kiernan already answered twice. What would it actually have taken to make you sell? In 1968, America put one Mustang on screen for nearly 10 minutes and turned it into the most expensive of its kind ever sold. 2 years later, a company almost nobody took seriously sold a sports car so cheap it made half of Europe look like a mistake. And if you want to know the 6 car brands you think are European are already Chinese, watch this video next.